The Maid's secret song. The winds that swept across the wide Wyoming plains always carried a kind of lonely music with them. To Clara Evans, those winds had been her companions since the day she first set foot on the Rocking H Ranch. She had arrived with nothing but a worn valise, a faded dress, and a heart still tender from the bruises life had given her. The ranch was immense, acres upon acres of golden grassland rolling out to meet the mountains, and though it was owned by one of the wealthiest cattlemen in the territory, inside its grand house Clara lived as nothing more than the maid. Her days were long, filled with polishing, scrubbing, cooking, and the endless list of chores that kept the ranch house gleaming. Yet Clara never complained. She was grateful for the roof over her head, for the food set before her at mealtimes, and most of all, for the little girl whose laughter brightened the dusty halls. Her name was Lily Prescott, just 6 years old, with a tumble of honey-blonde curls and a pair of eyes that seemed far too wise for her age. She was the daughter of Samuel Prescott, the wealthy rancher who owned the land, the cattle, and nearly every man in town in one way or another. But Samuel Prescott was gone more often than he was home. His work carried him far across the state, negotiating contracts, driving cattle herds to railroads, or attending to the business that made him one of the richest men west of the Mississippi. Lily rarely saw her father, and she had not seen her mother in years, for Mrs. Prescott had passed when Lily was still a toddler. That absence left a quiet sorrow in Lily's heart, one Clara recognized all too well. Clara herself had grown up motherless, her father a laborer who had worked himself to death before she was 16. She knew the ache of loneliness, the hunger for a soft hand to tuck the blankets, the sound of a gentle voice singing a lullaby in the dark. And so, without being asked, Clara filled that space for Lily in the only way she could. She never presumed to be more than the maid. She knew her place. But when the chores were done and the house lay still beneath the stars, she would sit beside Lily's bed and stroke her hair, singing soft melodies her own mother had once hummed. Songs that smelled of bread ovens and wildflowers, songs that wrapped sorrow in sweetness and made even the loneliest night a little warmer. It was on one such night that Samuel Prescott came home. The sun had already dipped behind the horizon when the sound of wagon wheels crunched along the gravel road. Clara didn't hear it at first. She was busy folding linens in the kitchen. Lily had begged her for just one more story, and Clara had promised she'd come soon. The kitchen lamp burned low, the air carrying the scent of fresh bread cooling on the table. Outside, the gate creaked open, and a tall figure stepped down from the wagon. Samuel Prescott stood there, boots caked with dust, hat shadowing his rugged face. He was broad-shouldered, with a kind of presence that commanded attention even in silence. The hired hands greeted him with respectful nods, but he wasted no time lingering. Weeks away from home had left him restless for the sight of his little girl. He walked quietly through the front door, not wishing to wake the household. But as he crossed the wide entryway, a sound stopped him. A voice. It was soft, warm, and carried the kind of tenderness he had nearly forgotten existed. He followed it down the hallway, each note pulling him closer like a string tugging at his chest. At the end of the hall, Lily's door stood ajar. Samuel pushed it open just enough to see inside. The lamplight was dim, casting a golden glow across the small bed where Lily lay nestled beneath her quilt. Clara sat beside her, her hand brushing lightly through the child's curls. Her voice floated like honey through the room, the old lullaby rising and falling with soothing grace. Samuel froze in the doorway. He had expected to see the maid, yes, but not like this. Not transformed from the quiet girl who polished his floors into a woman who looked as though she belonged to the very heart of the home. The sight unsettled him, not in anger, but in the way it stirred something he hadn't felt in years. Lily's eyelids drooped as she whispered, "Sing it again, Clara." Clara smiled, tender and patient. "Just once more, sweetheart. Then you must sleep." Samuel stood in silence, hidden, as the lullaby wrapped the room in peace. He watched his daughter's breathing steady, her little hand clinging to Clara's fingers even as she drifted into dreams. And Samuel, who had weathered storms, driven cattle across raging rivers, and faced down men with guns, felt his throat tighten. He had returned to his house countless times before. Yet never had he come home to a scene that made the Grand Ranch feel like something more than timber and stone. It felt like a home. When Clara finally rose from Lily's bedside, she turned, and nearly gasped aloud. Samuel Prescott stood in the doorway. Her heart leapt to her throat, and in an instant, the calm she'd worn vanished. She fumbled with her apron, bowing her head. "Mr. Prescott, I didn't hear you come in, sir. Forgive me." Samuel studied her quietly. The lamplight caught the copper threads in her hair, the gentle slope of her shoulders. There was nothing grand about her dress, nothing fine about her hands, worn from labor. And yet, there was a grace about her that words could not touch. "You sing to her every night." His voice was low, rough from the trail. Clara nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. She misses you, sir. It seems to comfort her." Samuel glanced at Lily, now fast asleep with a faint smile still lingering on her lips. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a breath that sounded heavier than he intended, he murmured, "Thank you." Clara swallowed, unsure if she was dismissed or expected to stay. "Would you like me to prepare something for you, Mr. Prescott? Supper is still warm in the kitchen." But Samuel only shook his head, his gaze never leaving her face. "Later. For now, tell me, who taught you that song?" The question startled her. She hesitated, then answered softly, "My mother," before she passed. Something flickered in Samuel's eyes, a shadow of grief, an echo of recognition. He gave a slow nod, then stepped aside to let her pass. Clara dipped her head, her steps hurried as she slipped into the hallway, her pulse racing. She had not meant for him to hear her singing. She had not meant to reveal that tender piece of herself. Yet he had heard. And in that moment, something unspoken had shifted between them. The rest of the night passed in silence, but Clara could not sleep. She lay awake in her small attic room, staring at the rafters. She could still feel the weight of his eyes upon her, still hear his voice asking about the song. He was her employer, a man far above her station. He was the wealthy rancher who owned everything she touched, while she was merely the maid. She reminded herself of that truth again and again. And yet, when he had stood in the doorway, there had been no judgment in his gaze. Only something deeper, something she could not name. Down the hall, Samuel sat in his study with a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. He should have been reviewing contracts, counting profits, or planning the next drive. But his mind returned, again and again, to the sound of that lullaby, and to the woman who had sung it. A growing bond. Morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Prescott ranch house, spilling golden warmth across polished wood floors. Clara was already awake before dawn, as always. The routine of her chores had become second nature, sweeping, dusting, mending. Yet something in the air felt different since Samuel Prescott's return. She tried to ignore it, tried to steady her hands as she kneaded dough in the kitchen, but her thoughts refused to stay quiet. The image of him standing in the doorway last night, broad shoulders filling the frame, eyes unreadable as he listened to her lullaby, refused to leave her. "Clara!" The voice of Lily rang through the hallway, bright and eager. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and hurried toward the little girl, who came bounding down the stairs with curls bouncing. "Papa's still here," Lily exclaimed, her small face glowing. "He didn't leave yet. He's in the parlor, drinking coffee. Will you come too?" Clara's heart stuttered. She shook her head gently. "That's for you and your papa, sweetheart. Go sit with him. He's missed you." But Lily grabbed her hand stubbornly. "No. You come too. I like when you're there." Before Clara could protest further, the child tugged her straight into the parlor. Samuel Prescott sat in a high-backed leather chair, the morning paper spread across his lap. He looked up when they entered, his expression softening instantly at the sight of his daughter. "Good morning, Lily girl," he said warmly, setting the paper aside. He scooped her into his lap, pressing a kiss to her forehead. The smile on his face, rare, unguarded, made Clara's breath catch. "And good morning, Miss Evans," he added with a polite nod in Clara's direction. Clara dipped her head. "Good morning, sir. I'll fetch more coffee." But Lily clung tighter to Clara's hand. "Stay, Clara. Please." Samuel raised a brow, a faint glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "It seems my daughter has already made her wishes plain." Clara hesitated, caught between duty and the undeniable warmth of being included. Finally, she perched lightly on the edge of a nearby chair. The three of them shared breakfast together, something Clara had never imagined. She served the food, of course, fluffy biscuits, fried eggs, bacon crisp from the skillet, but Samuel insisted she sit as well. Conversation drifted easily at first, mostly Lily's chatter about her pony, her dolls, and the story Clara had told her last night. But gradually Samuel turned his attention to Clara, asking questions she did not expect. "Where did you grow up?" he asked between bites. Clara smoothed her apron nervously. "A small town north of here. My father worked the mines. We didn't have much." Samuel studied her, his expression unreadable. "And your mother? She passed when I was 8. Clara's voice softened. "She used to sing, though. I think that's why Lily likes the songs." For a long moment, silence filled the table. Samuel's gaze lingered on her, not with pity but something else, something searching. Then he nodded once, firmly, as though tucking the knowledge away. Lily leaned against Clara's arm and declared, "I want Clara to stay with us forever." Clara nearly dropped her teacup. Her cheeks flushed hot, and she glanced quickly at Samuel. His jaw tightened slightly, but instead of rebuking his daughter, he only ruffled her curls and said quietly, "We'll see, Lily girl. We'll see." The days that followed unfolded differently than before. Samuel's presence changed the rhythm of the house. He rose early, worked long hours with the ranch hands, and returned each evening with dust on his boots. But unlike the past, when his time at home was brief, detached, consumed with business, he lingered now. He joined Lily for supper, walked with her in the pastures, even sat in the parlor in the evenings rather than vanishing into his study. And wherever Lily went, Clara was never far behind. Samuel began to notice the smallest things: how Clara coaxed laughter from his daughter with a silly story, how she patched a tear in Lily's dress with careful stitches, how she carried herself with quiet grace even when exhaustion shadowed her face. The townsfolk noticed too. One afternoon, Samuel rode into town for supplies, and whispers trailed after him as he passed the mercantile. "They say the Prescott girl clings more to the maid than to her own kin. Shame, really, a wealthy man like him letting his daughter be raised by hired help. And some say the maid's got him under a spell. Sang him a song, and now he can't look at another woman." Samuel's jaw tightened as he heard the murmurs. He didn't dignify them with a response, but anger coiled in his chest. People would talk, he knew that. Yet the thought of Clara being the subject of gossip, of her name tossed about like common fodder, unsettled him in a way he could not ignore. That evening, storm clouds rolled over the plains, thunder growling in the distance. Clara hurried through her chores, closing shutters and checking lamps. The sky broke open just as darkness fell, rain lashing against the windows. Lily clung to Clara, frightened of the thunder. Clara wrapped the girl in a quilt and settled her on the settee, singing softly to calm her. Samuel entered the room and paused at the doorway, watching. Lightning flashed, illuminating Clara's face as she cradled Lily close, her voice steady despite the storm. When the girl finally drifted to sleep, Samuel crossed the room and knelt beside the settee, adjusting the quilt. His hand brushed against Clara's by accident. She drew back quickly, her breath catching. "You're good with her," Samuel murmured, his eyes lifting to hers. "Better than anyone I've ever seen." Clara swallowed hard. "She only needs love, sir. That's something any child deserves." He held her gaze, and for a moment the air seemed charged, like the storm outside had spilled into the room. There was something in his eyes, something unspoken but powerful. Clara felt her heart tremble under its weight. But she reminded herself fiercely, "He is your employer. Nothing more." She rose quickly, breaking the moment. "I should check the kitchen, sir." Samuel watched her go, a muscle working in his jaw. He had not intended to feel this way. He had built walls around his heart years ago, after his wife's passing, after too many betrayals in business and in life. And yet, this maid, the simplest of women, was breaking through those walls without even trying. Days turned into weeks. Samuel found himself seeking Clara's presence in subtle ways, asking her opinion on meals, lingering in the kitchen longer than necessary, finding excuses to join in Lily's bedtime routine. Clara tried to keep her heart steady, tried to remind herself of the divide between them. She heard the whispers from the townsfolk too, the sideways glances when she accompanied Lily and Samuel into church on Sunday. "She's just the maid. Mark my words, she'll forget her place." The words stung, though Clara pretended not to hear. One evening, after another long day, Clara sat alone on the back steps, gazing at the fading light across the prairie. The sky burned with streaks of orange and violet, and the smell of rain lingered in the air. She didn't hear Samuel approach until he was beside her. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, nodding at the horizon. Clara startled, rising to her feet. "Mr. Prescott, I didn't expect—" "Sit," he interrupted gently. "Please." She hesitated, then obeyed, folding her hands in her lap. They sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the ranch settling for the night around them. Finally, Samuel spoke. "I've been away too much," he admitted quietly. "Left Lily with only walls and hired hands. I thought money and comfort would be enough. But it wasn't." Clara glanced at him, surprised by his candor. "She needs more than that," Samuel continued. "She needs what you've given her." Clara's throat tightened. "I've only done my duty, sir." He turned toward her then, his gaze steady, intense. "No, you've done far more than that." Samuel watched her go, the unspoken words still hanging in the air. And in that silence, he knew with certainty, the bond between them was no longer something he could ignore. Love beyond the divide. Autumn painted the Wyoming plains in russet and gold, the crisp air carrying the scent of dry grass and wood smoke. The rocking ranch bustled with the rhythm of the season, cattle driven in from pasture, grain stored in barns, preparations for the coming winter. Clara worked harder than ever, her hands raw from scrubbing, mending, baking, tending to Lily. Yet her heart carried a restlessness she could not name. Since the stormy night weeks ago, Samuel Prescott had grown quieter around her, though his eyes often lingered when he thought she wasn't looking. Clara felt the unspoken words between them like a living thing. She told herself to keep her head down, to remember her place, but deep down, a dangerous hope stirred. Hope that scared her. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. Samuel had taken Lily into town for sweets and ribbons, leaving Clara behind to finish laundry. She was gathering linens from the line when she heard voices near the front gate. 2 women from town, wives of neighboring ranchers, had stopped by. Their bonnets tilted just so, their eyes sharp with curiosity. "Is Mr. Prescott at home?" one asked sweetly. Clara shook her head. "No, ma'am. He's in town with his daughter." The women exchanged glances. One leaned closer, her voice dripping with false kindness. "You'd do well to remember your place, girl. Folks are already talking." A maid who forgets herself, filling the shoes of the mistress of the house? It never ends well. Heat rushed to Clara's cheeks. I've done nothing but care for the child." The other woman sniffed. "For the child, or for the father?" They left with satisfied smirks, leaving Clara shaken. By the time Samuel returned with Lily, Clara had already made up her mind. She would leave. That night, after Lily was tucked in bed, Clara climbed the attic stairs with trembling hands. She pulled her small valise from beneath the cot, the same one she'd carried to the ranch months ago. Slowly, she began folding her dresses, her apron, the few belongings she owned. Each fold felt like a stone pressing into her chest. She told herself it was for the best, for Samuel's reputation, for Lily's future. She was only the maid. She had no right to dream of more. But a soft knock at her door startled her. "Clara!" It was Samuel's voice. She froze, panic racing through her. Hastily she shoved the valise beneath the cot again and opened the door. Samuel stood there, his tall frame filling the narrow stairwell. The lamplight flickered across his face, etched with weariness and something else. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded, stepping aside. He entered, his gaze sweeping the small attic room, the plain cot, the wooden trunk, the single quilt. His jaw tightened as though the sight angered him. "You're packing," he said at last, his eyes flicking toward the edge of the valise peeking from beneath the cot. Clara's breath caught. I thought it best." "Best?" His voice sharpened. "For who?" "For you," she whispered. "For Lily. People talk. They'll never let me be more than the maid, Mr. Prescott. And it isn't fair to her, for me to stay when I don't belong." For a moment, silence stretched thick between them, broken only by the patter of rain on the roof. Samuel's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Don't you dare say you don't belong," he growled softly. "Not when you've given Lily what no amount of money ever could. Not when you've given me—" He broke off, his voice rough. Clara's eyes stung with tears. "You don't have to say it. We both know the truth. I'm nothing but a maid." Samuel closed the distance between them in 2 strides. His hand caught hers, rough and warm, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You are not nothing," he said fiercely. "You are the woman who's brought laughter back into this house, who's taught my daughter how to smile again, who's taught me how to feel again." Clara's tears spilled over. "Samuel!" His thumb brushed her cheek, gentle against her trembling. "I won't let you go. Not because of gossip. Not because of pride. Not because you think you're less than you are. You belong here, if you'll have us." The world seemed to still. Clara searched his eyes, desperate to be certain. And what she found there, steadfast, unyielding, raw with truth, broke the last of her fear. With a sob, she fell into his arms. His embrace was strong, enveloping her as though he'd been waiting years to hold her. For the first time in so long, Clara felt what it meant to be safe. The next morning dawned clear and bright. When Lily bounded downstairs for breakfast, she found her father and Clara already seated at the table. Samuel was pouring coffee, Clara setting out biscuits. Lily blinked, then smiled wide. "Are we a family now?" she asked hopefully. Samuel glanced at Clara, who blushed but nodded faintly. His arm wrapped around his daughter, pulling her close. "Yes, Lily girl," he said. "We're a family now." The little girl squealed with joy, throwing her arms around both of them. Clara laughed through her tears, her heart swelling with a happiness she had never dared to imagine. For the first time, the Prescott Ranch didn't just feel like a house. It felt like home,